Nicholas Cruz of the Parkland shooting, Stephen Paddock of the Vegas shooting, and Omar Matin of the Pulse nightclub shooting have all committed mass shootings, but they have also all committed domestic violence multiple times before these tragedies were committed. None of these men were punished for the abuse that they caused. If they had been punished for the abuse, would there be a different outcome for the mass shootings? There needs to be stricter gun laws for those with a history of domestic violence. Once someone is charged with domestic violence, there is a lack of enforcement on the penalties that were given. Most domestic violence convictions go underreported and are misclassified into the National Crime Information Center. When someone is found guilty of domestic violence, it needs to be reported to the National Crime Information Center so the penalties of the conviction can take place. According to an article by Charlotte Alter for Time magazine, according to a Florida International University report obtained by Time, the military mishandled roughly 1,300 domestic violence cases between 2004 and 2012, including misclassifications that allow abusers to go unreported in the NCIC. There are thousands of cases that have been misclassified, says Eric Carpenter, an associate professor at FIU and a former Army lawyer who spent years sifting through military court marital data. There are some instances where the police respond to calls and feel it's best for those involved to handle the situation themselves. Kimberly D. Bailey from the Brigham Young University Law wrote a journal that stated, "Yet for several decades, law enforcement and prosecutors did little to enforce these laws. The criminal legal system treated disputes between a husband and his wife as a private matter. And if the police did respond to a call, the typical response was to separate the parties involved and have the boyfriend or the spouse take a break and calm down. When incidents are not reported or are misclassified, abusers are able to continue their lives avoiding penalties that are supposed to be given to them. Domestic violence abusers can be brought to court, but oftentimes these cases get dropped. An article written by Rick Brundon from the IRE Journal said 2 years before Teresa's death, prosecutors charged Willie Earl Reese Jr. with severely beating her, but these charges were later dropped. This was a typical pattern statewide that our investigation would find. The CQ researcher had an article written by Barbara Mantle that said, after separating from her husband in June, North Carolina school teacher Larissa Armstrong twice asked judges for a protective order, once in late July and again in early August. Both times she was denied. The 62-year-old Armstrong wrote the court that she feared her husband, who she said hit her and recently slashed her tires. Larissa Armstrong died on September 7th, a little more than a week after police say her estranged husband shot her in the parking lot outside of her Greensboro apartment. Since the court denied protective orders, Larissa lost her life. If there had been records of her abuse and a protective order, this could have saved her. The government should have mandatory laws of reporting domestic violence in all states. By getting rid of state laws that are inconsistent, domestic violence cases will decrease. In an article by Pamela Praw for CQ Researcher stated, on a typical day in the United States, 3 women are murdered by their spouses or partners, and thousands more are injured. While men are also victims of domestic violence, women are 5 times more likely to suffer at the hands of a loved one. If there are stricter laws and more documentation of domestic abuse, it can save many people's lives. With enforcement penalties on those who are charged with domestic violence, abusers won't have access to harming their victims. Some states have had domestic abusers give up their weapons after their arrest, which takes deadly weapons away from them and then creates a safer environment. The United States has laws for domestic violence, and this will continue on the trend to ending it. There has been research done about the connection of domestic violence and murders. The mass shootings have shown history of domestic violence that has led to these tragedies. The benefits that stricter laws would have would be that women are more likely to report their abuse if they know that their abusers will be handled effectively. By getting abusers to give up their weapons, more lives can be saved. A nationwide law would make sure there's protection for everyone, because it would be in a system that the crime was committed and the penalties that follow the crime would also be in the system. According to an article by Lynch, Logan, and Jackson, protective orders have shown to effectively reduce violence in Kentucky in many cases. The protective orders are shown to work, but without taking precaution of other penalties, tragedies can still happen. By creating a nationwide law that makes it mandatory to report all cases of domestic violence allows victims to feel safe. Abusers will be penalized for their crimes, which can help to eliminate the problem. With lack of reporting domestic violence and the penalties that follow, it's a growing issue and it needs to be changed.